and welcome you all to Something to Talk About, which is a program we do here at the Senior Community Center, generally 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 1:30 in the afternoon. Today, we're going to be talking with Joel Sackett, who has put together a new book, Dave's Brain Box about Dave Ullin. And I want to start by thanking Fieldstone Community of Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers innovative and compassionate care up on Rolling Bay. They have memory care right now. They're looking at, they're in the process of constructing assisted living and independent living facilities. And they also offer day stay and respite programs. To learn more, call 360-689-4314. And I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Suquamish tribe. We honor and are grateful for the hospitality of our neighbors, the people of the clear salt water. Joel Sackett, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us about this beautiful new book, Dave's Brain Box. And I know that one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is to talk a little bit about how you came to do this. And then I think maybe you might read a little bit about who Dave Ullin was.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, thanks everybody for being here in this space that we occupied together.
At this virtual space.
Yeah. And that's the cover shot we're looking at right now. And here's the actual cover. It doesn't really have a water background. That's something we just did. Jeanette Alexander, the designer, did that for this presentation. So yeah, I'd like to talk about the project, and I'd like to talk about the Brain Box a little bit. And the truth is, I'm gonna read from the book what the Brain Box is, because I don't think I could speak about it as well as I've written about it.
That makes all kinds of logical sense.
Okay, good. So here we go. I'm just going to read this part of it.
Okay.
What is Dave's Brain Box? This is on page 3, and Dave took notes on the backs of recycled envelopes, various sizes of pads and notebooks and index cards. The index cards were kept inside of his brain box, as he called it. The container itself is the smallest waterproof Pelican-type case I've ever seen. Its dimensions slightly larger than the 3x5 index cards he kept within. Dave often carried it in one of his large canvas tote bags, along with tools and whatever else he needed for a particular day. The Brain Box was portable enough to take out, write some notes on a card, or share the writing on one with a friend he might run into. One of those friends humorously likened it to Dave's iPad. Dave wrote a wide variety of things in these cards, his and others' philosophies, pieces of his conversations he's had, personal history, book reviews, reminders, reactions, and lists for marine hardware he might need. Not every card was unique. He restated his key thoughts that he was always fine-tuning, like about volunteerism, education, purposeful work, or the web of life.
So might I interrupt there and
Yes,
just say
please.
a little bit about, just give us some context for people who might not have encountered Dave Ullin as an icon and a representative of the offshore, the waterfront community here on Bainbridge, living offshore.
Mm-hmm.
How did you first encounter him?
Well, I first encountered him soon after I moved here in 1990. I saw him walking around town, and he immediately caught my attention. And he was wearing, his overalls and the short kind of logger pants, I think they were called, and boots. And he really stood out from the crowd. I asked around about him, who he was, and found out that he was a liveaboard. He lived on a tugboat called Spruce, and I went down to try to find him. That morning that I went to visit Dave for the first time, he wasn't all that receptive, but we spoke, and I felt that I should come back another day and just continue the conversation, and that's what we did. We sort of built on that and just continued to walk around Winslow together or hang out at his boat. And we talked about a lot of different things.
Yeah, when you saw Dave around town, he looked like he was coming from another century almost. He
Yeah.
certainly only used, as far as I know, very hand-focused tools.
Yeah, he was known for his tools, particularly the ones that he used to work on boats. But there were no power tools that I'm aware of he ever used. He carried his tools and his brain box and other things he needed for the day in canvas tote bags around town, and that was sort of part of the image that we would see when we see Dave.
Right, you'd have this tall man.
Yeah.
Very strong looking.
Yeah.
Carrying a canvas bag or two.
Yeah.
In a determined gait towards somewhere.
Right, very determined in his gait, absolutely. So he was really a striking figure. So we got to know each other over time, and although I didn't really understand everything he was speaking to me about because some of it was technical and about boats and about tools. He didn't understand some of the things I was talking about either, but there was a mutual curiosity there to keep going.
Yeah, I think you mentioned you come from different worlds in a way. You brought a different perspective, looking at a lot of the world through a lens.
Yeah.
As opposed to looking at it as objects that you're going to manipulate.
Yeah, sometimes Dave and I would stop because I wanted to look at the light or some object or something, and we would stop, and he would be very interested in what I was seeing. So there was a really good kind of sharing that went on there. So yeah, and then it just turned into a unique friendship. I think most of his friendships with people were unique, and we just kept going from there.
So David died a few years ago, and you had been taking pictures of him before.
Yeah.
And then did you take pictures of some of his objects after he died?
Yeah. What happened was I had been photographing. I mean, not immediately. I started photographing Dave maybe 3 or 4 months after I met him, and intermittently when I would visit, I would photograph him. Sometimes we would photograph together. Like I have some interest in the tools he was using, and he would participate in how they were going to be photographed, setting them up on the deck of the tugboat with some canvas, and we both kind of collaborated together. And I thought that was really, really great to be able to collaborate with him. Some of the other photographs that appear in the book, Dave's Brain Box, were taken after he passed on board. A group of his friends went to the boatyard where his tugboat was in dry dock, I guess you call it. And we had to take all of his personal effects and tools off the boat. We took them back to the island for safekeeping. The boat, unfortunately, had to be destroyed. In his belongings was the brain box, and I didn't see it that day or those days that we were emptying out Spruce. I saw it a few weeks later when Lorraine Sfornick, one of his close friends, showed it to me. And that's when it struck me that this was a very rare and, for me, very interesting artifact. And as I opened the brain box and looked at all the index cards inside, I was not reading them. I was just looking at them. They were visual to me. I was looking at the handwriting, which is rarer and rarer to see these days, anything handwritten. And the pages themselves were dog-eared, it's the ones that were his favorites. He kept reading over to himself and to other people. There were thoughts that he had that some of them were crossed out and written again. There was the binding that he used, the string binding to hold them together as little books. So I was looking at it as a rare artifact that probably couldn't be handled very much in the future because it was delicate, but should be shared. Not only the content, but also how it looked itself, the thing itself. So that's why I decided to photograph its case and all the cards inside so that we could not only read them, but we could also just experience what that object was.
So here's a picture that shows some of the binding.
Yeah, those are let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are 4 small sections of cards that he kept together, and I wanted to preserve that. It's very like Dave to do this kind of handiwork. So I wanted to show that from the side.
Right. And I think that it presented this way, and in many of the pictures in the book, the cards take on a almost, certainly a craft aspect, if not an artistic aspect.
Right, absolutely. I mean, even that string that we used, I believe it was nylon, and the knots that were used to finish it. I think that they were like heated or burned a bit to close them. I mean, really great details all around Dave all the time. Let's move to the next.
So you have a couple of essays in here by people.
Yeah.
Tell me how you sort of chose who to ask for those.
Well, in the early stage of this, when I had the idea to do the book, I wanted to make sure that I had permission from his family to do that. So I contacted Dave's sister, Jan Ullin, and we discussed it, and she was really open to the idea. And she even wrote something for the book, which is my favorite bit of writing in the book. It's a little bit long, but I'd like to read a little bit of it.
Okay.
It's titled Growing Up with Dave. And I'll just read you the first 2 or 3 paragraphs because it's like 2 or 3 pages long. Born September 14th, 1942, he was called Dave, and I am the lucky girl who was born into this wonderful family 2 years and 10 months later. He was nothing but kind, loved to engineer dirt, rocks, and water, and would disappear into the large maple wood forest bordering our home above Alki Beach in West Seattle. It was a great house, hand-built by Dad and Mom and Grandpa and Beba, Grandma. We had a 180-degree view of Puget Sound and the Olympic Mountains to the west. When I was 2, we bought 400 feet of waterfront property on Westcott Bay, San Juan Island. It was our favorite place, and Dave and I always wanted to be there. Lucky for us, Dad was a teacher, and we shared the same vacation schedule. The island was our constant destination, expanding our lives in so many ways. This essay goes on for 2 or 3 pages, and I hope you can buy the book and read it.
Yeah, here's a picture of them.
Yeah.
And so Jan probably shared that with you. Obviously.
Yeah, this is one of the snapshots that Jan sent me of her and Dave fishing for salmon. I think he was around 16 years old here. Could be wrong, but I think so.
And so you put these together. This is Dave with Paul Sfornick.
This is Dave with Paul Sfornick, and Paul also contributed a very, very beautiful essay about his friendship with Dave. And again, I'll read a little bit.
Okay.
Unless Paul's here and he wants to read. Okay. Let me just read for Paul just the first paragraph.
Okay.
I think it was in the fall of 1983 that I first met Dave Ullin. My girlfriend Deanna and I were milling a Douglas fir log into boat lumber on a beach in Eagle Harbor. We were using a large, noisy chainsaw mill, and we were very self-conscious about how loud it was. Halfway through the first day of sawing, we noticed a very strong man approaching us in a rough but equally strong-looking Banks dory. I had seen him rowing that dory from a distance several times before. making powerful strokes with purpose and absolute precision, feathering his oars with every stroke. I knew that he lived aboard a somewhat shabby-looking tugboat that had recently anchored in mid-harbor. I had never seen him up close, but couldn't help noticing the way that he rowed. Again, this is a really nice essay, goes on for a couple of pages, and get the book and read it. Right?
So this is a front-on picture. We have a number of these. This makes
Yeah.
up, I would say, the bulk of the book are,
Yeah, the bulk of the book are photographs of the cards themselves, right?
and so when you were laying them out, it looks like you chose a place. Where did you set them up to shoot them?
Most of the photographs were taken on a board that Dave owned that seemed to be the perfect backdrop for it. It was just a beautiful oiled plank that I had borrowed from his belongings to use as this backdrop for photographing. This first card, interesting because when I first saw the brain box, I wasn't thinking about making a book of it. I just wanted to look at it. And I photographed this one card. And then I posted it on Facebook. And the reaction was strong. I think about 150 people saw it, liked it. And I got a call a few days later from a friend who suggested that I combine images of the brain box with photographs that I had taken over the years. And I thought, well, that's an interesting idea. And I started to look at that possibility. And that's how the brain box evolved into what it is, which is basically about Dave's index cards and the ideas that he presents, but also the photographs that I had of Dave over the years kind of gave you some space to rest between reading these cards. So I think I'd like to read that first card.
Okay.
Yeah, the first card is powerful for me, called, maybe we can go back to that read. There it is, Dave's View. I came from a pioneer-like start, a homemade, do-it-yourself background tied together with generosity. When I started first grade in public school, I was instantly aware of the frivolous nonsense of this culture, the accessories and activities not related to basic needs, a waste of time, a waste of resources, and a detour away from inner contentment. Working with nature, with hand tools, and especially in a garden, builds a can-do, and it continues to the next page, but okay, there it is, can-do attitude, combined with reverence that is way stronger than the peer pressure needed to conform to the show of society. Strong words, but they rang true.
Well, and I mean, both in the way that he lived and the materials that he used and the projects that he took on, it seems as though he was of one piece about this philosophy.
Right. This philosophy is repeated in different ways and from different angles throughout the book. And it's interesting to me to see that he returned to some key ideas and kept examining them. Right. And that's very much the way his mind works and the way a lot of our minds work.
So as you started to look at this, as you told me before we started, you were not Dave's closest friend, but you met him over years, and he shared his personal life with you so you could take pictures.
Yeah.
As you looked at these, did you come to know him better or no?
I'm not sure. That's a really good question. I guess I got to know him better, but I think when Dave and I were talking, especially if it got into things about boats or tools or the sea, I kind of glazed over, and I was just kind of watching him speak. And but I did get to know him better over the years.
But in these papers, is there a lot on boats and and technical issues?
No,
It's
not
more
so much.
philosophical?
Yeah, it's more philosophical. And I think that what's interesting to me at this point in the project is we have Dave, the unique person, to think about, to talk about. We have the stories about Dave, the memories, if you happen to be fortunate enough to have spoken with him or done any volunteer work with him. Those create memories, and that's also in the past because he's not here anymore. But the ideas that he wrote on the index cards for the brain box are still very much alive. That is the living legacy that really encouraged me or inspired me to do this book, that there's a possibility there that we can still use these ideas to improve ourselves and our community. Dave may be gone, but the ideas are still here.
So I guess that's probably Paul with Dave.
No, it's actually, his name was Alan, and he was a liveaboard here for many years. That's a new boat that he was building and Dave was helping. A plywood boat. Yeah. I want to go back to one page.
Okay.
Oh, maybe, there it is. The index card on the right is interesting to me when I saw it because there was a previous book I did called In Praise of Island Stewards. And I asked Dave to contribute to that. And here's where I saw him first write about what he was going to write about, right? And he wrote, this is the year 2000. He wrote, "We each contribute to the course of evolution. I choose to steer a course of voluntary simplicity, using resources mindfully, because of care and respect for all the forms of life we equally share this earth with. My mother imprinted me with care and respect for living things by having me with her in the garden. I was aware of this by the age of 3. While building the house with hand tools, my father imprinted me with craftsmanship, which is an expression of integrity through work. These values lead to an integrity of being. Intelligence and care define the motives. Voluntary simplicity is the practice. Sustainability is the result. Inner contentment is the reward. What this world needs is more gentleness and kindness, gardens and compost piles." That moves me still when I read that. I mean, when you think about what kids are doing these days, living with their devices all day and all night, this is as far from the garden and hand tools as you can get. So I'm hoping that some of these ideas somehow gets to our young population here. So.
Right, and as you said, this was not something that the book could be handed around. It was delicate and fragile. So capturing it this way is a way to.
Right, I wanted to capture so that people could read it. They won't be able to see handle the original, but rather than transcribe it into a typewritten text, I thought it was really important to have it in its original form, as a facsimile at least.
Yeah, I agree that it has some power by seeing his own hand and his own emphases and colors and so forth.
Yeah.
There's the bag or one of them.
Here's one of his canvas bags that he'd be walking around town with, and there's a detail of some of his efforts he made to preserve things. Where all of his clothing was like this, and nothing got tossed away very easily.
Yeah. Repair was and darning was part of his work.
Darning was a craft that he really enjoyed.
Dave's Way to World Peace. I do believe toy play conditions children for external dependencies, whereas purposeful work with parents and real tools develops a can-do attitude and inner contentment. He could be writing for the Waldorf school or Montessori, I think.
Yeah, right.
I believe this imprint leads to the caring and sharing attitude of altruism needed for world peace.
Yeah, so again, you see some of his core ideas were repeated throughout the index cards, but from different angles. And he just kept kind of crafting the ideas, just like he would craft everything. Here's Paul Spornick. One day we went to Phil Shively's place at the head of the bay to visit with Dave Story. We turned it over because if we didn't turn it over, we'd be catching water in this position.
Right.
And we were just kind of visiting with it.
It's a lovely picture. So these cards are worth spending time, which we're not going to be able to do today for each card, but it's motivation to pick up the book.
Yeah, I think it's the cards themselves, what they look like, the content, and also just the way one unique individual's brain worked, right? I think this is a very direct communication between Dave and himself and the world.
Yeah, that kind of.
I mean, it is in a sense a diary, but he also shared that. It was not unusual for Dave to pull the brain box out in town. He thought of something that was in the box. He was talking to somebody. It was for his friends to share with him. Now here's a picture of his workstation in the hull of his tugboat. Sort of a massive drill press, I guess that is. And again, I wanted to preserve some of what I found inside of his boat because I knew it was going to be destroyed. And this is all that remains of that. Very few people have had the privilege of going into Dave's space, which was a bit like a machine shop.
So when you visited him before, it was mostly.
Yeah, mostly we'd sit around on the dock or on the deck, but 2 or 3 times he would invite me downstairs. So again, I like the change of pens and the handwriting, the marks that he made. Here's an older photograph I took of Dave. I was still shooting film, so that must have been at least 20 years ago. And that's Spruce, his tugboat home, Eagle Harbor.
Right. And that captures the gait or the way that he moved.
His gait, and also, I mean, I like that his pants, his bottom is kind of wet because he's probably sitting on something working, right? Yeah, that day that I visited, we had decided to photograph some of his tools. So he brought out this very nice piece of canvas.
Right.
And we started to put tools down on it, and he would actually do the arrangements, right? We were collaborating. It was really a good feeling. It wasn't just me doing photography. It was Dave would jump in and let's do this together. Right.
Nice.
Again, a still life from inside of his tugboat after he passed. Oh, this is his, guess you call it a galley, I'm not sure. A little kitchenette. We landlubbers call it.
That's right.
You know? And
a little garlic on it.
Yeah. Don't know what's in those jars, but I'm sure it's healthy. I like the TV dinner tray.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes, that's an artifact in itself.
That's an artifact in itself.
So this is the box.
This is the box. It's just a little bit bigger, just big enough to fit these cards. And when I opened it, that's what I found. I'd like to read this.
Okay.
I'll just read it from the screen here because I really like what one of his friends wrote to me. I wanted to use it on the back cover. How does a normal day turn into a day of possibility? Dave pulls out his brain box. Holding up his favorite quotes would remind him of other writings, and off we go. Like a touchstone, each card inspired a greater thought, another idea, a greater world. That box may look small, but it held worlds. No, it held universes of possibilities. And that's, I photographed the brain box. That particular photograph was on Phil Shively's dock at the head of the bay.
Nice. So I'm interested if anybody has any questions, but do you have any thoughts you'd like to make sure we get in here before we take questions?
Yeah, I'd like to talk just for a minute about one of the things I learned from Dave was about communication. Very often we would be talking about something and he would have to think about it. And to think about it, he would close his eyes, usually close his eyes and look up to the sky and start thinking. And I'd be standing there waiting for him to finish his thought. That waiting could go on for 15 or 20 seconds. And it got a little awkward the first few times he did that because we're accustomed to filling in all the space when we communicate with each other. We just don't allow that to happen usually. Something wrong about silence in our way of verbally communicating with each other. But after I got accustomed to Dave doing that, it was very liberating. I felt, oh, I could do that too. At least with Dave, I could do that. I could stop what we were talking about and just pause and think, and he'd be fine with that. And once in a while, he would do that during a conversation, and there'd be like 20 seconds of silence, and then he would just walk away. Right? He wouldn't say goodbye. He was just thinking and walking. He had to go on to his next thing. And the next morning at around 7 o'clock, right outside the senior center here, there was a payphone. I don't think there's no payphone out there. He would call me and he would continue the conversation just about mid-sentence of where we stopped. And that was also kind of challenging to pick up the conversation the next morning. Maybe he was up for 2 hours already, but I wasn't. So it's a really liberating way of communicating with people, but it's pretty uncommon. And I can only really do it well with Dave.
Yeah, well, it sounds like monotasking in a profession, sort of in a well-developed way.
Maybe that's why we can't do it, because our brains are trying to process too much stuff and we're multitasking all the time and we're not present enough. Dave was extremely present. He wasn't thinking about what else he had to do or what else was going on. When he was there with you, he was there 100%. So, all right, what else we got?
Well, let's see. If anybody has a comment or a question, just open up your
or a story about
Dave. Just unmute yourself if you would like. We'd love to have open this up a little bit.
Well, I've got one. This is Ann Lovejoy.
Hi, Ann.
Hey,
Hello.
I'm doing laundry, so I'm not going to show you my face, but I connected with Dave most early on for me when we were doing a program at Eagle Harbor Church called, it was from the Earth Institute, and it was about knowing where you live. I don't know, Reed, if you were part of that, but I was, I went to all these different, I think we met a dozen times and read stuff together and talked about it. And it was like knowing your community and knowing where you were. And one of the things I really noticed is like Dave was always walking, but he'd walked all over the island. And so I was always talking about like the plants that grew in certain places. Like, yeah, well, the skunk cabbage always opens first at that corner of High School Road where it's really swampy and it runs out at Bounty's farm, and you can look down in that little ditch, and he would be like, yeah, but there's also that one on Peterson Hill, right? Or I mean, it was like he didn't talk that fast. He would be very slow about it, but I was fast. But he would be nodding and saying, yeah. And when you said that, Joel, about how he would close his eyes and tip his head back, I was like, oh, absolutely. And you'd wonder, like, are we still on this conversation or not? But we also connected over mending, because I also like wear my clothes for 20 or 30 years, as some people have noticed. And I'm a decorative mender. I like make the most of it. Dave was very much a pragmatic mender. And sometimes we'd have little discussions about, is there a value in embroidering something on top of your big mend, or is that kind of a waste of time? But he was really sweet about it. But I could tell that he thought I was frivolous, which is not untrue. So there you have it. But anyway, I have many, many warm memories of that kind of conversation with him.
Thank you. That's great.
John Quitzlin. Can you?
Yeah, I've got a lot of memories of Dave. I didn't know him for that many years, but at the point where I started writing columns in the Kitsap Sun, and then they showed up in the Islander, which was a free paper, still is, of course. And he would stop me in TNC or somewhere else, and he had clipped this column out, and he said, "You're going to have to explain something to me, or I want to give you my perspective," that sort of thing. And he was so thoughtful and so curious about other people's thinking. And I know we talked more than once probably about housing and the need for affordable housing. He said people should be allowed to build what they want, but they have to build it themselves. And that would control housing on Bainbridge Island. That would control development. And that still rings a bell with me, because there's a tradition in my family going back before my grandfather and down into my the do-it-yourself attitudes of my sons. I think it's really important to emphasize the need for sweat equity and the value of sweat equity. Taking something that needs work, and I know a lot of people on the island have used that to improve their property, but it's just something that we should hold on to. And Dave's just one of the people who's representing that, but more thoroughly, more largely than anybody else I know.
Yes, I think that many of us are intimidated, and Dave obviously, as this book shares, from a very early age was taught to figure it out and work it out and take all the time it took to solve the problem, which, but I need this by next Tuesday. So
Right. Well, I think getting these values about building and gardening and everything Dave talks about, he keeps going over that, but it always happens with children. He's kind of saying, get them at a young age, right?
which was his experience.
Which was his experience, right?
Yes. Let's see there. Bobby had a question about what became of the brain box. Is it being preserved?
Yeah, the brain box right now it's in safe storage at a good friend's house on the way back to his family, and that's where it will reside until a more permanent home could be found. Possibly it'll just stay in the family, or maybe it'll find its way into a museum. I'm not sure yet.
Okay. Any other comments or questions for Joel or about the book or memories of Dave? I want to
Well,
ask you, oh, go ahead.
I can jump in again. I can't tell you how many times I was standing behind Dave at Town and Country when he was buying potatoes. And we would always get into these big conversations about potatoes. And I thought, I think he lived on potatoes pretty much. He ate very, very simply. And we had a lot of conversations about composting and organic gardening, of course. But I was really struck by, Joel, you kind of touched on this, like the thoroughness. Talk about an examined life. Like there was no aspect of Dave Ullin's life that was not thoroughly examined more than once, right? And I think about how you were saying, the gap in the conversations could feel awkward because we're so used to racing on to the next thing. Like that piece more than anything, and it was peace. He had a very peaceful side to him that allowed him to really consider deeply everything from how to darn a sock, believe me, to, how to plant potatoes, how to harvest them, which kind were the best keepers, how to live in real simplicity in a very complex world. I would love to see that brain box go to a museum where it could be not just archived in a box, but somehow spilled out so that people could look through glass or whatever at and really think about the things he thought about so deeply.
One of the things that, I mean, we're not going to be able to decide that today, but I know that the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art has an extensive art book collection. And in many ways, this seems like that kind of a product. It's not your normal kind of a book. It's loose, but it's also got bindings, and the way it's put together is almost as much of the story as the words that are on it.
I think so, yeah.
How did you, when you started to think about the idea that you were going to turn this into a book, did you consult with some people? Did you talk with people about what it might look like, or
Yeah.
is this pretty much your own?
Pretty much my own. Of course, I talked to his family, his sister, described it. I talked with his good friends, Paul and Lorraine Svornick, about it. I actually became very dependent on a few friends that I shared this with to bounce ideas off of, but pretty much I was on my own. I had a pretty clear idea of what I wanted this to be like. And Jeanette Alexander, the designer who worked with me on this, was a collaborator as well. My wife, right? So yeah, I work on projects, and I'm pretty clear about what I want to do, but I always have friends that I can talk to around it to bounce ideas off of. I might not listen, but I need them just as much, even though I may not listen to what they have to say or use what they have to say. It's odd. It's just part of my quirky creative process.
And it was the same way that you kind of came up with the idea of the people who might be able to contribute context through short essays.
Right, absolutely. I think there's a balance here. I mean, the main course are the index cards themselves and what Dave writes, but we need some relief from that. And those are where my other photographs come in, right? Or the essays that people have contributed.
Well, it is a absolutely beautiful book.
It's different.
It's different, but it's the product is really nice. It's
Yeah, when I say it's different, I mean in the photography world of books, they're usually just photographs, one after the other, with white space around them. That's what I kind of learned to do, but this took on a life of its own.
yeah, using that oiled board in itself is
Yeah.
kind of like another dimension about Dave.
Yeah.
John, do you have another thing you want to drop in here?
Well, a question, kind of a loose end, but it's related to this collection of testimonies from different people. Joel, I wonder if you're in touch at all with Tristan Bowerick. because
Yeah.
Tristan, I remember a feature, it must have been in the Islander several years ago. At length, Tristan was writing, and he had been in the boat. He had really given sufficient time and attention and charmed Dave enough to be really allowed in. And I've lost touch with Tristan, although I think he's accessible on Facebook. But he had quite a collection, I think, of
Yeah,
photographs.
Tristan is actually, he's a reporter now in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Which is exciting. And he contacted me. He saw a post on Facebook about this book and he got in touch with me.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, he told me about the time he spent with Dave, and then I sent him a copy of this book. So, yeah, so we're in touch.
That's good.
Yeah.
And just one other thing, and I wish I had witnessed this, but I did witness Dave coming to city council and planning commission meetings from time to time with comments, and he wouldn't insist on more time than anybody else got. But there was a meeting in which Dwight Sutton was so moved by something that Dave had said that he just said, Dave, you've got the rest of this meeting if you want to say more. And I think he did take a lot more time to lay some things out that people needed to hear. So we've lost a great public citizen. And I haven't seen anybody else in his shoes or anything like him.
Yeah, when I was doing some research for this book, I actually listened to some recordings of Dave at past city council meetings, which were pretty incredible. They're in the archives at City Hall. So that was pretty interesting.
Sheila Kerwin.
Yeah, I wanted to just share one thing. I was several years ago, I was docing up at the Historical Museum, and Dave was in there as he came in every once in a while. And he was there that time because they were picking the person who had won the prize for that particular giveaway that we had, and he had won, and he won it. Not only did he win it, but it was money. There was money involved in it. And what he did with it was he got his teeth fixed. Don't know if any of you know about that, but I remember that him telling us as we were, I was just standing right next to him, and he's a big guy. And I said, David, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to get my teeth fixed. And I thought, oh, okay. That was wonderful. Delightful, delightful. Thank you so much, Joel, for this. It's wonderful.
Yeah,
I can't wait to see the book.
Thank you.
Yes. Beth.
Wait, there we go. Hey, I got to know Dave when I was involved with Trust for Working Landscapes for many years, and I was very engaged in education, outdoor education, and oh, okay, and there I am, and he was so curious about Odyssey School. About the collaborative nature, and I just really respected that he was still open and still growing and still engaged and curious in what was going on around him. It wasn't just his way. I mean, he was on intake as well, and very much an observer. And one thing I remember is how he had his own infrastructure for communication. There was I don't know if it was a rock or a box or something where you would leave a message and he would pick it up. And, his creativity for how to live in the world. Really
it was a pile of wood somewhere in Winslow at someone's house. And if you wanted to get in touch with Dave, you'd write a message and you put it in this pile of wood and he would find it.
Yep.
Yeah,
Really a creative approach.
Yeah.
And it worked.
Worked.
That's what was cool. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Not in the spirit of Dave. I'm going to keep the sound coming out of my mouth and just take this moment to thank you very much. And I think, again, this is a gift to the community. It's a memory box for the rest of us, either who did not know Dave as well or who did, I'm imagining. Beautiful, beautiful pictures.
Well, hopefully it's a guide also for what we can still be working on.
That's right. That's right. And I was taken by the focus on education. And I think that probably is something that is clearly open to all of us, as Beth was just saying, at any age.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you for all coming today. Appreciate it. And these books are available at the History Museum, right? There's some copies there, and there's some copies at Backstreet Beat, right? And
Right.
also at the Chandlery. So that's where you can get them.